Well, a report by the Institute of Public Affairs has found that 90% of Australian universities have policies that are hostile to free speech. Now, this is a concern not just for students, but surely this is a concern for Western civilization. After all, the thing that allowed the West to prosper was our rejection of dogma and our willingness to ask questions and to debate ideas. Joining me is Brianna McKee from the Institute of Public Affairs. Brianna, universities are meant to be places of curiosity, not conformity. They're meant to be places of free thinking, not groupthink. What's happened?
Yeah, James. So what we've seen is that there is a free speech crisis on university campuses. It's getting worse, and our research shows that 90% of universities have policies that are explicitly hostile to free speech. What we've seen is that universities have policies and they use terms that are so broad and so subjective that they can be weaponised by activists to censor speech. And of course, this flies in the face of the core purpose of education, which is to hone the mind through debate and intellectual challenge. And the essence of university life is the contest of ideas. But this is being extinguished on campus, and it's giving way to groupthink and censorship.
Now, with your research, you provided some examples of some of the policies that restrict free speech on our campuses. Let me go through some examples with you. Central Queensland University tells students and staff that, quote, direct verbal confrontation and expressing disagreement with Indigenous people should be avoided to preserve consensus. Now, I would have thought, Brianna, that consensus was not what you're looking for at a university. You're looking for open debate. And isn't this a little bit racist, suggesting that Indigenous people can't tolerate any sort of disagreement?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is a much broader issue. Activist causes, they're being pushed in universities, but they're also being pushed in the education system, in schools, through the cross-curriculum priorities and also in the public debate. But what we're seeing increasingly is that universities are adopting formal ideological positions, and these are contributing to censorship on campus. And our research shows that every single university has a policy or strategic commitment. There are 77 in total, and these pledge allegiance to ideological issues like equity, sustainability, Indigenous affairs. So what we're seeing here is the rise of the social justice university. There's a new emphasis on activism over education. And really, universities are trying to serve two masters, knowledge production, but also activist causes, and they're censoring speech in the process.
You mentioned these three sort of main ideological stances that our universities are taking, climate, Indigenous affairs and gender. Doesn't that create a problem for students? Because if they're to take a counter view on any one of these major narratives, then they end up going against the values of the university itself, which then puts them in a difficult position, doesn't it? And secondly to that, does that then create the effect where students start to self-censor?
We are seeing students self-censoring, and I think the threat of punishment is causing students to increasingly self-censor. So you may not be seeing issues where you're sort of seeing universities crack down, but that's because students are already self-censoring because there is the threat of punishment. And what the IPA has done is we've released audits. This culminated in a national debate, and the government commissioned former Chief Justice Robert French. He developed the French Model Code. This is a policy to protect free speech. But our research shows that universities haven't adopted it. It was a step in the right direction, but universities didn't listen. Only a third adopted the 6 pro-free speech criteria. And so this has failed. Really, the French Model Code was a band-aid solution. It helped to an extent, but it didn't actually address the fundamental issues, which was the policies themselves and the mindset giving rise to them. And so we need to look to the US, to the UK for free speech style legislation. They're ahead of Australia, and we need to look at what they are doing over there and potentially bring it here to broaden our policies and protect free speech. Just before I let you go, Brianna, I've got to come up with a couple more examples of what you found in our universities. La Trobe University bans bullying, which sounds good, but they define bullying as jokes, teasing,
nicknames, and they say bullying can be unintentional. I think you mentioned earlier that some of these things are pretty vague, and those vagaries create very uncertain ground for students. The University of Wollongong's inclusive language guideline tells students to avoid using words like man or ladies or mothering or fathering and wife. So in the name of inclusivity, our universities are excluding, basic biology, aren't they?
Yeah, it would definitely seem that way. And yes, the core problem here are the vague and subjective terms that are being used, and they can be exploited by these activists. So students are not able to have their views challenged and to engage in intellectual inquiry, to use their freedom of speech and to test ideas out. And so universities are actually failing in their core mission, and that's really problematic.
It is pretty problematic and pretty concerning, Brianna. I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for joining us.